of Board of Selectmen by reading our agenda. We may be taking some of these out of order, but this is the published agenda. 7 p.m. community input, 7:05 one-day beer and wine application for the Clark Organic Farm. 7:10 Concord Carlisle High School presentation about the special town meeting articles. 7:45 update on the fire chief search process. 8:15 we're going to close the October 2nd special town meeting warrant. 8:30 town administrators report. 8:45 the selectmen liaison reports. 8:55 approval of the minutes, and 9 o'clock adjournment.
Sounds good
And
to me.
it's being 7 o'clock exactly right now. I'm going to invite any community input. Anybody here from the community who would like to put anything in? Seeing none, we'll move on to our 7:05 one-day beer and wine application for the Clark Organic Farm.
There's one for Clark Organic Farm and one for the Clark Farm Market. Jeff Freeman's the applicant in both cases. And these are identical to the two licenses that the board granted last year for their Oktoberfest and their Big Roast.
Okay. I just have one comment, and I don't mind this one. I know we've seen these before, but I would prefer personally not to be making these contingent on a whole bunch of stuff. So at the very least, I would love to see these come in to us signed off by the police department. I understand that they can't get the insurance certificate until they get the permission. So that, obviously, we would still have that contingency, but in future, could we see to it that we get?
Sure. We don't actually give the license until all of the contingencies have been met. So even when the board votes it, Jen hangs on to it until
I understand, it's just
the
that
chief signs off and we get the
even rather
certificate.
not move it until we got some of that stuff in advance, but
Will do.
that's me. I don't know if that may not be, I don't know if the rest of the board agrees with that. But
Yeah, no,
We never do.
yeah, yeah,
they're afraid of me.
exactly. You know, I don't care either way. I mean, I think it makes sense to, yeah, kind of check as many boxes prior to as possible.
Yeah.
And then it's set, and then, yeah, we just have to, plus it makes the motion shorter.
There you go. So,
Yeah, yeah.
having said that, would one of you please read the motion?
I would move that we grant a one-day wine and malt beverages license to Jeffrey Freeman, owner of Clark Organic Farm, pursuant to MGL Chapter 136, Section 14, for an event to be held at 185 Concord Street on Saturday, September 22nd, from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m., subject to the application providing a host liquor liability insurance certificate and contacting the police department to determine the necessity of a police detail prior to the event.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second?
Is there anybody here from Clark Farm that wants to add anything? And I don't see the police chief here today.
Chief will be here later.
Yeah, I know he will, but he's not here yet. Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That was unanimous. All right, I have one more.
And I would move that we grant a one-day wine and malt beverage license to Jeffrey Freeman, owner of Clark Farm Market, pursuant to MGL Chapter 138, Section 14, for an event to be held at 201 Bedford Road on Saturday, October 13th, 2018, from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m., subject to the application providing a host liquor liability insurance certificate and contacting the police department to determine the necessity of a police detail prior to the event.
Second?
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
That was unanimous. Okay. We have the Concord Carlisle High School presentation at 7:10. It's not yet 7:10, so I'd like to go on to the town administrator's report, because there may be some other people from town who might be wanting to come to that presentation.
Do that.
And nobody ever wants to hear Tim's report. It's a safe bet that that's the one to go with, yeah. No offense, Tim, I didn't mean anything by
I'm not
that.
missing anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the first item in my report, you remember the discussion we had last time about the parent-teacher organization and the Bay State Textiles. the collection bins for clothing. I did talk with Gary about that. He has no objection. However, there were 3 other such bins at the transfer station, and he thinks that at least one of them would have to go before we could accommodate this one. He suggests that since the Salvation Army has 2 of them down there, they might be convinced to consolidate and go with 1 bin. So he'd be happy to put the Bay State Textiles bin down there, but he thinks 4, he's gonna have a little
That'd
bit
be too
of
much.
trouble
Yeah.
fitting it in. So,
Do we know yet if the school committee has accepted to put a bin on their property?
We have not met since that.
Or still haven't met?
Discussion here, we're meeting September 12th, I think,
Okay,
our next meeting.
all right, well, we'll bring that up again once the
Okay.
school committee has visited it.
very good. All right, that, second item in my report, the speed limit public hearing by the Traffic Safety Advisory Committee has been scheduled for Monday, September 17th, 7 PM at the Corey Auditorium. There'll be more details to follow, but we have scheduled the date for the hearing. We discussed that again with the chief last time, but confirmed the date for that.
Do we have any plans for advertising that or
Yeah, and
publicizing that through the mosquito?
Yeah, we need to
or,
get that out there, yeah.
um,
Sure.
Because,
Just
you know,
making sure
now that
it's
we've got the
done.
quarry, I would hate to come and get in there and then there's just the
6
5 of
people,
us.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. Well, and the thing is too, there was a pretty good turnout at the
At the, yeah, right.
prior meeting, so,
Yeah, so, and I would like to do it maybe more than once, maybe we need to, maybe the TSAC wants to write a letter to the editor or
Right.
as well. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be a good idea.
Notice to the Paper on that, okay.
I put it in my phone.
It's
I
really
need
hard to get 'em.
reminders, that's,
Yeah.
I'm falling apart.
And I should go on the website too. 'Cause, by the way, the website's looking really good.
It is, yeah.
I was trying to find meetings and they're all there. It's
Right.
wonderful.
We did have a
Yeah.
note, yeah. Probably send the same notice to the newspapers. Oh, we-
It's just that it's still publishing every 2 weeks.
Oh, they're not, right, actual regular,
yeah.
so that regular.
School.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
all right.
exactly.
Okay. Very good. Item number 3, in your packet, you have a letter from the president of Carlisle Police Officers Bargaining Unit asking to begin negotiations toward a successor collective bargaining agreement. Historically, 2 members of this board have been part of the bargaining unit. We've had members of the Finance Committee the last 2 times we've bargained with this unit as well. Sometimes it's the liaisons to those departments, and sometimes it isn't. So you might want to think about who would be representing the board on the bargaining team
How many,
going
who
forward.
are our liaisons for the,
I think it's me and Nathan.
you and Nathan, you want to do another?
I don't want to do another contract,
Yeah,
no,
so,
so I'd be happy to
maybe
pass
we
that
have
off
to
to
think
somebody.
about.
Yeah, I'm tired of
um,
contracts.
Right.
Yeah.
It
Well-
doesn't have to be 2 members either. Sometimes scheduling becomes difficult with.
Well, that's why it's good to have 2, I think.
Two.
You
I
know,
think
so-
that's
so
why-
you
yeah.
can always flip-flop, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so we'll probably talk about that
Think
in our
about that.
next
Yeah.
meeting, about, what, would you put that on the agenda and
Mhm.
as we'll,
Yep, sounds good.
Very good. Okay, and got the upcoming meeting schedule in my report. The Finance Committee will be coming in on September 11th. I think I saw Victor, the new chair of the Finance Committee, was asked to come in and start to talk about the budget planning process for FY '20, getting a good early start on that. And we'll also be talking about the Tier 3 Complete Streets application, and I'm sure town meeting as well. The speed limit hearings on the 17th. And we have another meeting in September on the 25th, and the special town meeting will be on Tuesday, October 2nd, the night after Concord's special town meeting. And that concludes my report, Madam Chair.
I won't be here on the 11th. I will be in Nebraska.
Lucky you.
Yay, I know.
okay.
Corn or?
Yeah, that's exactly, yeah, yeah, a little better corn out there, so I figure might as well travel. Yeah. So, I just buy 4 tons and it all equals out in terms of cost, yeah.
All right. Well, I'd like to invite people from school, CCH,
Okay, they do have a presentation.
for,
we get
Might
to
take
to
a
come
couple
and-
minutes to get that
okay.
set up if you.
Is it a presentation that we
Yeah,
need to?
exactly, some
Ah,
slides.
it's gonna take me a few minutes to,
Take your time.
that's all right, to get out of your way. If we're moving. And if I'm moving, that means you're moving. I'm gonna take my trike.
There you go. All right. That'll go away.
Is this a good spot?
Yeah, if you would, because the microphone.
Sure.
Pick up for broadcast, I can advance the slides
Great.
for you.
Great.
Okay?
Great, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. I'm Lori Hunter, Superintendent of Concord Carlisle Regional School District, and I'm very excited to be here to tell you what we're proposing. And first of all, I want to be incredibly appreciative. This has had a very quick turnaround, and your response here in Carlisle has exceeded our expectations for sure. So I want to be sure tonight we take time to give you context, understand what we're hoping for, and understand what the request is so that it really fully informs you as to what's happening at the high school and where we're hoping to go. Tonight with me, Jared Stanton's the Director of Finance and Operations. Bob Grom's here, Chair of the Regional Committee, and your own Mary Storrs is here. She sits on both the Carlisle School Committee and the Regional Committee. So we have two proposed articles, and I just want to back up because, as you know, the high school opened 2014, state-of-the-art facility, highly valued space. We're very, very fortunate for what we're able to do there. So the question in the room is, of course, why are we asking for funds given the enormity of that project and the success of that project? So there's a couple of layers to the discussion. One being there are some just leftover things that need to get finished up, whether it be from the project itself. You're also aware, I'm sure, of the extensive work done by CC at Play to build the fields and the facilities that support the campus for our athletics use and the use of the community. So there are some pieces to that also have some dangling items that need to be rectified. We've got a short punch list of things that just were never quite right, weren't under warranty, and those need to get rectified. And then we've got some long-term vision work to talk on. So it's past and what needs to get finished, it's current and some needs that have arisen as we've been in the building, and then future for where we're hoping to go and to be informed about what the options are as we look toward the future. So overall, we're not short of anything in the high school in terms of academics, education. We could want for nothing in that facility. And we're grateful for the support of both communities to allow us that. All of these are external to the building and meant to be either safety related, compliance related, and I'll talk in some depth on some of the requirements of the land and the campus over there because it's on public watershed and Concord's bylaws for pervious and impervious surfaces, and the monitoring of that is very rigorous. As well as what we could hope for down the road. There's some outstanding items that have come up that with the landfill remediation that's finally been complete, there's that open parcel of land calling for its use, and so we've been trying to process what those options are. So the first article for this $100,000 are current items that need to be rectified. So this is the hard list of projects that are on the must-do list, either for compliance issues or for safety issues. So we have a lower field drainage issue. Subsequent to the CC at Play work, we had a lower field drainage issue. Some remediation was done in 2015 that had hoped to be adequate. Since then, it is proving to not necessarily be satisfactory, especially to some of the abutters to the property. In high rainstorms, heavy rains, which we seem to get more and more often, there's some pooling and flooding down along the Swain that's near their land. So in agreement with the Concord Natural Resource Commission, if the original remediation did not work, there would be a subsequent project to look at the drainage. So right now, there's a drain pipe that's actually meant to have the water drain through it as it comes in. The challenge is the water table there has proven to be very high, and so the water table is actually up over the drainage. So as you can imagine, if you're getting a quick volume of water, there's no place for that to go if the pipe's already sitting in the water table. So the proposal is to pick the pipe that was laid originally out about a foot higher, not have it pervious so that the water will travel through it rather than trying to sink in underneath, and it will direct the water in another direction. This is being requested of us by the Concord Natural Resource Commission, and so this is a must-do item. One way or another, we need to comply with the request. We have funded $6,000 in design work from the operational budget, so we have the scope of work required to meet this request, and we know the project itself is $25,000. The second, stop me at any time if you have questions. The second item is one that had been in the original building project to facilitate ambulance access to the nurse's office. It's a simple cut into the curbing so that they can back in and have some space right there without having to pull up a side, and they're juggling stretchers over curbs and things like that. That had been in the original project and then value engineered out, so we'd like to rectify that so that the fire department has easier and more efficient access. The other two are, frankly, punch list items that, despite efforts, have not been working as they would have hoped. So an emergency shower control and spray booth ductwork for a total of $100,000. And so those are our short-term needs. Again, they're not eloquent or exciting in many ways, but they do meet the requests of the local commissions and fire department and of safety needs in the school. So that's probably the more straightforward one. Yeah.
That adds up to 120.
50, 90, 120.
Oh, thank you. It needs to be 100, so I apologize. The spray ductwork needs to be 20. Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, the spray ductwork is 20 and not 40.
Yeah, my apologies.
That's fine.
So, I have a question about
Yes.
the curb cut.
Yeah.
You value engineered out a curb cut.
So there's a number of things that got valued engineered out, and I can't explain them all not having been there. Choices get made when designs are getting finished and projects are getting finished and budgets are running tighter. All I can do is give you an example of another value engineer out that probably seems more egregious to me is that where the showers are in the science rooms, the drains were value engineered out. So if those showers get used, I'm going to replicate the water problem we just had with the fire because there's no drain in the room. So it's not all logical, and I can't speak, none of us were on the committee to be able to give that process. We can certainly find the history for you and get it, but the value engineering process sometimes is not as thoughtful as we all might wish. All right. Yes.
In terms of timing, were these not identified prior to the timeline for last town meeting? Is that why?
Correct. So the drainage was just brought to our attention in May. The ambulance cut has been on the to-do list for a little while, but we needed to get it packaged with, we weren't going to just come forward with that kind of a tag for an item, so we needed to package it with others. The other two there, we've been watching and trying other makeshift repairs to and haven't been successful. So really the reason to package them now is because we want to have a full suite of things to finish this year and knock these off the list and call them complete.
These would be for fiscal
out of fiscal 19 current year.
We'd issue debt for this, though?
Well, I think that's a conversation to be had tonight. Concord is issuing debt.
We won't have any payments till next year.
So we don't have to worry about passes, we don't have to worry about source of funds.
Right.
Okay. Any other questions on these? Thank you. And that's the actual language in the article, which identifies those 4 projects very specifically. So the second request is really meant to address many of the other ongoing topics that have come up. So let's start with the previous things that have not been finished. As part of the CC at Play project, there was intended to be a concession and refreshment facility along the football field. And right now, we are out of compliance with the restrooms. We are supposed to have available restrooms. So in combination with the concessions and refreshments, we'd be looking to add a certain number of restrooms. We've had a challenging discussion because the size of the stadium requires a certain number of restrooms, and we need a waiver to not have to build 40 restrooms for a stadium that's used for a very minimal amount of time every year. So that's the first, would be to get a plan for concession, refreshments, and restroom facilities. The second need is irrigation. We're struggling with the amphitheater that was put in and actually maintaining the grass that's available there. It needs to be watered regularly, and right now we don't have a system attached to it. There's a lot of requirements attached to the National Natural Resource Commission and some of the oversight with watering and irrigation on the campus, so we need to get that figured out, so we'd like to get some design work. Let me qualify all of this by saying this is all for feasibility work so that we have information to make the plans. Right now, we feel underinformed in what we would propose for the regular town meetings because we don't have sufficient detail and depth as to what the projects entail, what the options are, and what will be allowed by Concord bylaw or regulation. So this is to make sure that we're fully informed and can make priorities and logical decisions that don't spend money in the wrong direction. The lower field irrigation, there's an irrigation pond there that right now, the way it's structured, is not necessarily pooling enough to irrigate the lower field, so we'd like to look at what those other options might be on the lower campus. Paving and lighting were initially part of the building project. This would be the road that's along in front of the Beatty Center. The road's in bad shape. We keep patching it, but it needs to be finally paved. We also need to put in additional lighting. We've band-aided that as well to ensure safety, but we'd like to get that master plan finished where the road's in really solid shape and the lighting is adequate. That would also include some sidewalk work down along that lower campus. One of our ongoing challenges since the building opened is the amount of parking that's available. It was decided at the time to not necessarily consider the needs of both the juniors and senior students as they age into eligibility for driver's licenses. So right now, we've had a pretty ongoing conversation, ongoing as I speak, actually, in terms of who's parking and how they're accessing parking. So this year, we're allowing seniors to park, and we have adequate parking for seniors only. And so we expect quite a bit of feedback from the junior class when we are only able to lottery off about 15 spaces for them. That's concerning for sure. They're going to have a lifestyle change, some of them, as they aren't able to get to their jobs or their practices or some of their different commitments. We've tried all sorts of creative options here, and we agree with many of the folks in both communities that this is about changing habits and promoting carpooling and other bus riding and all those other options. But in the meantime, while we work on those efforts, we have an ongoing chronic issue that's impacting the stress level of our kids because of the challenges in getting to where they need to be and how they're accessing their transportation. So we would like to get some options in place as to what other parking we might be able to provide. One of the challenges there is what I referenced with the regulations in terms of what we can have for surface types on the campus. At one we're limited in where we can put pavement and where we cannot, and we need to look at what those options are and what their realistic accessibility is, while we also look at costs and all those other drivers as to how we might address this pretty chronic need that we're having continual dialogue about. Any questions on any of those? Yeah.
Question about the parking, because parking entails maintenance.
Yep.
Snow plowing and things
Mhm.
like that. Is that going to be covered, you think, by the fees, or is that going to have to be subsumed into your operating budget?
Sure. So I think depends. Our intent is that we'll subsume it into the budget. We're re-looking at all of how we're operating in terms of snow plowing and major snow removal. Given last winter, there were definitely some events that were not as efficiently responded to as we might have hoped, because we're trying to clear that whole regional campus with the equipment that we have. So it would be part of that discussion. I think as we make a better master plan this year, we would be able to loop that forward. So the last portion of this really is meant to be a look at considerations of the campus advisory committee that met last year, which worked as an advisory committee to the joint school committee. And through that ongoing stakeholder group, we had multiple people from different constituencies meeting often and regularly to first understand the campus and specifically the landfill, but not limited to the landfill because of the remediation there. There's a lot of detail and nuance to what's allowed there, as well as any other ideas they might have for what the other options and opportunities the campus might provide. So we held forums, we solicited input as many ways as possible, then brought that back to the advisory committee, who then vetted those, looked at what those options were, eliminated some if they weren't reasonable or realistic, and then rose 5 of them to the school committee level to have further consideration. It's impossible at this point for the school committee to be able to prioritize or determine which of those is feasible without more information, and that's why this is meant to be part of the design work we would be looking for. So among the top ideas that surfaced were a 6 or an 8 lane track. There's no track currently on the high school campus. A potential building of some kind, whether it be a field house. There was a lot of energy around a potential ice rink. We obviously need much more information to know if that's an option. Outdoor educational spaces. So ideas here included a covered pavilion, a greenhouse for student use, and a true outdoor classroom where teachers could access outdoor opportunities for kids to either learn in the outdoor environment or really interact with the outdoor environment. So those options are all out there. The other piece of this that's complex is making sure that if we choose one option or rectify one of the needs or outstanding items on the previous slide, we don't limit ourselves in what can be done of the future projects. For example, if we put parking on the landfill, does that eliminate the option of a track down the road? So that's why we're looking for some simultaneous consideration and some design and feasibility work from professionals to help us know how or if all of this could fit together and what those potential ideas might be. So this is the maybe list. This is the list of possible options and ones that the school committee would consider. As I said, we have ongoing conversations with the Natural Resource Commission. It is a public watershed campus. The land there is a public watershed, so we have to be very conscious of the runoff and any potential contamination of the runoff, and highly monitored and supported by the town of Concord to make sure that we don't in any way jeopardize this. Obviously, that's a concern for us too, jeopardize the safety of the public water supply. So that's what's proposed. The dollar amount on this right now is $200,000, which was the rough number we got from 3 different engineering firms just to get a number in here. The school committee's worked with Jared's office to develop an RFP that we are actually currently posting and have put out contingent on funding, but the RFP bids are due back in the middle of September. So we would actually have hard numbers as to what the professionals would need to complete what we've proposed, and we could modify the 200,000 to closer to actual costs once we have those RFP returns in place. And so that's the actual wording in the warrant. Obviously, you'd be looking at Carlisle's share of both warrant articles, and Concord's looking at their specific share. I'm happy to take any other questions. Yeah.
On the first warrant, I'm curious, why did you opt not to include the wording not to exceed 100,000?
Jared, do you have feedback on that, given those are your work?
Sure. Do you want to pull it up? Yeah.
Sure.
Maybe we should go back to the table.
It's
Yeah.
not there, that's what he's
Oh.
We're
asking.
going to have a discussion.
We could certainly take that feedback.
Yeah.
Need help?
Nope.
I have no reason for that. We used some standard language that we have used in the past, and that was not in it. So.
This is an open checkbook, the way it's
Yeah.
written, so I mean, why would you not say, your
We
your
certainly
estimates ought to be pretty firm,
Yeah,
Sure.
100,000, right?
yeah, certainly our intention is not to exceed the
Right.
100,000, so we're happy to consider putting that in. This has been reviewed so far. That's why we're here tonight, to get your feedback, and so far we've reviewed more on the legal side of the wording, but we certainly understand why you would suggest that. Any other questions? Again, we're very grateful. I feel like this happened in sort of a whirlwind, and your response across the board here in Carlisle has been very, very much appreciated, so that we could consider this and hopefully be really informed with what we might propose for annual town meeting in the spring if any of these projects were to move forward. So we're, again, grateful for that.
I do have also some questions. Do you have some more,
Just
Terry?
on that same point, if you get firmer numbers by mid-September on the 200,000, you could have the not to exceed
Correct.
number in there as well. Thank you.
Any consideration on the design and feasibility warrant article for the 200,000? I'm breaking it up, because you have two kinds of different pots here. You have the completion of previous projects and identified needs, and then you have kind of a pie-in-the-sky needs in here. And this is a big number, so I'm just wondering if there was any way of breaking those up.
We could certainly talk more on that. I think one of the reasons it's designed this way right now is so that all of those are considered simultaneously by the engineering firms, because as I said, some level of correlation has to happen, because some of those projects may exclude each other, and in some cases we want to be sure if there's an opportunity for them to complement each other, we don't miss that. So that would be my first thought as to why we've packaged it this way, but we could certainly give it another look. And now these are due tomorrow, so that's one challenge, but I understand why you ask. I think right now we're trying to get the big picture view, which is why they're all packaged in one.
I was on every building committee. I don't know if you pulled out any of the old reports from 1989 on, just about, except for the last one. And I can tell you the field house had come up at one. And we were told at that point, something I'm going to tell you also, that I think you should consider very seriously. Forget the field house. The field house is like the pool. If you want that, get community support to help you fund it. It is not a part of the school committee, the school function. And I would say that I think that's just as true today as it was whenever, I forget, 15 years ago or whenever it was that we brought it up then. And that's why I'm particularly interested in not seeing it packaged with the other things, personally.
Again, that's a list of possibilities, not a given by any stretch.
It's really a pie in the sky. It's not a need. That's, and in this day and age, and when we can no longer deduct our property taxes from our income taxes anymore, it's a tougher and tougher sale to be getting these expenses.
Those will be all the conversations the school committee will have as to the viability of that project.
Well, but, you know, we need to decide whether we want,
Whether we want it in or not.
whether
Yeah.
we want it in or not.
Right.
That's a later agenda item as well, so you don't have to.
And I
Scott?
think I'd just remind you, for any funding, we would have to, this is just for the the feasibility portion of the process.
That's $200,000
By no
for
means.
Yeah, it's-
feasibility, for
right.
something that's gonna, Scott?
Scott Triola, Hart Farm Road. Two questions.
Yeah, Scott, could you come to one of the microphones,
Sure.
please? Thanks.
Two questions. Can you just give a quick recap? I know last year there was discussion about putting a warrant article in for town meeting. I don't remember the specifics,
Yep,
but it wasn't put in, and my impression is that this is a continuation of that.
It is.
If you could just give a quick recap of why it was taken off and how this ties to that. And the second question is, as we're considering an amount for a feasibility study, is there any rough estimates that can be given to what the ultimate projects would be so that we can determine if the feasibility studies were to present projects, are those even affordable projects? So it's always helpful to know before you spend money on a feasibility study, how big is the bread box you're going to build, and is that something that can be included in the discussion at town meeting, even at a rough estimate
Yeah.
level?
Yeah. So to answer the first question, it is connected back to the warrant articles that we did not put forward in April. And much of that is because the numbers we had in the proposed warrant article, truly, we didn't have enough information to feel confident in those, and I was uncomfortable bringing forward articles that were then asking the communities to fund things that I was not as sure of exact numbers. So this is in response to that, so that the planning portion is highly solid and tight and concrete, and we know what we need, and we're not asking for more than that when we actually bring the proposed projects forward. So to that point, this is in response to that, to try to have a better handle on what the actual costs are. I think we've had the chicken and the egg conversation with the proposed projects out of the campus advisory group, trying to get an engineering group to give us any idea of what a track might cost, or the field house, which frankly we've probably tried harder on the track because the field house is obviously an enormous project. The commitment level, once we start to explain some of the other engineering limitations and constraints of the landfill and the watershed, no one's going to just give us a quote that they're gonna be comfortable with and we're gonna be comfortable with. It needs a full engineering design, and that's been the conclusion of the work of that committee and the subsequent discussions of the school committee. That until we get an engineering firm online and paid to put together some proposals, we're not going to know exactly what we would need there, or even if it's a viability to have some of these projects. There's definite constraints to that campus space, and we need to have someone help us vet what those are and how they might go forward. So the goal here is to make all those wise, informed decisions, rather than coming to you for a big project that we get funding for and then we can't actually execute on, because that's how complicated the campus is. Any project that would go forward, you would need design and engineering work done prior to the actual project. So our goal would be that, that's money well spent, so that it informs what happens next.
Lauren, can I just add something?
Please, of course.
So, I think one of the things we're seeing at some of the field house, the ice rink, the track and field, all of those, what you're calling pie in the sky projects, there's some real appetite for private funding of those. But to Lori's point, we can't say, okay, track team, go raise money to put a track in, because we don't know if that's an option. So there's a lot of chicken in the egg. There's definitely some interest in some private fundraising, much like CC at Play, sort of the next phase of a CC at Play type effort. No promises, we can't make any kind of commitment, but I don't see the school funding an ice rink tomorrow. I mean, that's not going to happen. But I think there's some real interest in private fundraising.
Which I think could be done before you do the feasibility study and help to fund the feasibility studies, what I'm saying. Jim?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a similar thing with the senior center.
It is absolutely the same thing.
I wanted to make Jim talk.
I'm sorry. I knew that. I wanted to steal your thunder.
Just wanted to remind all of us, not so much
Yes.
directed to the high school, that in the town meeting in 2017, we had a warrant article for only $20,000 to study
whether to build a senior/community center. And the concern I think many people shared, and of course the Board of Selectmen opposed that proposal, as did the Finance Committee, was that $20,000, all it really does is create momentum to build a building we couldn't afford. And so, even though I understand the concept of analysis and feasibility, behind all of that is the opportunity to create momentum, and can we afford that second group of projects that are on that list? Thank you.
I'll just remind you, we don't even know if there are options at this point until we have some formal professional feedback. So that is the challenge here right now. We can't go tell the track team to raise money for a design for a track because potentially we can't have a track. So we're caught in this mixed messaging that somewhere we need to have the design worker take these conversations off the table.
Just to kind of expand upon your thing, though, I've been involved with CPC for a while, far too long, and just on this board a few years. But one of the things that Kate brings up that, I've seen is you bring something to town meeting, and if people get stuck in their head, concession stand, I don't want a concession, it's going to fail, and then you lose those other pieces. I'm kind of in agreement with Kate, if you could pull that out, and obviously have a firm, they would bid on both. Just because, as she said, it's really two separate things. And all you need is, the town to sway the wrong way on something. I understand it's all connected, but, if there's any kind of question that, because also too, like CC at Play had that in their proposal, they got private funding. Why didn't they go forward? There's still, there are questions that I don't know answers to, and I don't know if those have ever really been, brought out into the public, because maybe it's just they decided to put money elsewhere and they figured concession stand wasn't worth it. But yeah, I think, to Kate's point, that if that, was an issue in the past, it's probably going to be an issue. And even though there is general support, like an ice rink, my kids don't skate, they don't play hockey.
We were gonna put an indoor track
Really?
in our field house.
Yeah. No, but and that's the thing, so I mean, like, I don't care if there's an ice rink one way or the other. Would I support it? Probably, because, I understand there's a need, but there are a lot of people that might not. So, I agree with the outside funding, getting the community funding. But, to even ask for money to do a feasibility study on something that you don't really know if the community as a whole wants, it could become problematic. And then, like I said, the whole thing fails, and then you lose the irrigation, the lights, the paving, which I think that would be, that's kind of a slam dunk. I would think, maybe not, but, especially if you got the abutters that are having issues. Abutters tend to sway, tend to sway people, because everybody thinks that they're going to be
well.
So, yeah, so I share the same concern.
Yeah, well, same, I think looking at these, a couple really big ticket items in here, certainly to build a track or a field house, you're in the multi-million-dollar range there.
Yeah.
If that isn't feasible, then spending money on a feasibility study in terms of whether you can meet environmental regulations and all that sort of thing doesn't seem to have a very high probability of success.
Again, I think from our thinking, because if we were to put parking on the available space, we could quickly eliminate that option, and the goal here is to not exclude a potential many years down the road opportunity by decisions we make now. So that's the challenge at this point, is that even some of the things that are more necessities and requirements, we want to be sure we don't make decisions now that exclude opportunities that require other funding sources and long-term planning and are nothing that we're going to do in the short term necessarily. We're just trying to not make decisions now that prevent opportunities later.
Can this get you there?
We believe so, and the feedback, I think, so far from the engineering firms, without having their proposals back, is that they could give us informed information so we could make choices.
It's a lot of variables.
I mean, can you give a little bit?
It is a lot of variables. Frankly, we got overwhelmed with the number of variables and realized that as lay people, we are educators, we're not going to be able to put all these varying components together of the requirements and the water needs and all of those other highly intricate details of what this campus requires.
I guess I'm still struggling a little bit with what the deliverables are in this section.
We're actually, yeah, so the proposal is that we would receive a design and engineering study of these items so that we would understand potential costs, needs of the mandated committees, and what those options are and what space they might be available to put into. So for example, if we need a restroom facility down at the lower campus, we need to know where that might go, a design of what that might look like, and get that. By the way, the restrooms, we are out of compliance right now. So I just do want to stress, it's not just the concession stand. The restroom issue, we are completely out of compliance with what's required for the stadium usage. So
I hate to say this, but you can't fix it with porta potties for the few times that you use.
not per what the town of Concord is asking us, no. They would like to see permanent. They're willing to work through the requirements and work with us, with the inspectors and what would technically be required at the state level. But there's definitely a demand for permanent fixtures. It's proximity. If the school were just a little closer to the field, we'd be able to just say those were accessible, but the distance is too far.
If I were bidding on this, I'd have a rough time giving you a proposal, I think.
Okay.
And just
Yeah, I wish we had more time to take your feedback and do something with it. Because of the turnaround time and the processes, Concord's already approved, and those are in, and that deadline is passed. So it could be that we need to take this feedback to the community and do our best to explain it and see what happens in October. We certainly appreciate the feedback. It's important and valuable.
Well, we will be having a town meeting, and these will be on it.
Yeah.
Because, it's
Yeah,
on
no,
the
we're
warrant.
grateful for even the opportunity
But
to bring it to
we
the
can't say we're happy
people
about
and-
it necessarily.
and see what they think.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Wow, 7:45, update on the fire chief search process. Did Victor already leave?
Victor couldn't stay.
Oh, he could stay, oh. Would you, next time you see him, would you tell him to put me on his mailing list, please? I know when your meetings are.
Good evening, all.
Hello, boys and
Thanks
girls.
for having us. So, at our update / questions to expand and talk about what we spoke of before. So, regarding progress, obviously you saw us on the 14th. The next night on the 15th, we had a brainstorming session with the firefighters, with the committee members. The results were transcribed, returned, checked, to make sure that they matched what they thought happened. Once confirmed, we used those when we met with MRI on the 20th. So we met with our consultant on Monday, following that Wednesday night meeting. They reviewed, we met with 2 members of MRI. They reviewed the timeline and some of the procedures from their proposal. We're hoping for, and they're hoping for, potentially 1 to 3 finalists by at the latest 8th of November, if we hold them to that 11 weeks and they're able to do the 11 weeks. The committee would really like to have a finalist or finalists for us to work with on the 1st of November, but we'll take the 8th. We also asked them for salary range input prior to our meeting with you folks tonight, so that we could have for our meeting last Friday. So I'm going to get to that. And then we also asked them for their input because we know that you folks have discussed it, we've discussed it. Strong fire chief, weak fire chief. And we provided them that input from the firefighters. It was the first time they saw it, but they looked it over briefly and appreciated that. It was part of the process. They said they would probably then not do what they were going to do, which is kind of do the same thing. And so that helped them along down the trail a little bit.
And they're assuming,
You got the trick chair?
they're assuming full-time, right? The assumption was full-time?
So, part of their report, if you remember back from when they wrote the report, they recommended full-time. One of the things that the committee is here to recommend, to ask for, is the ability to hire that person be a full-time fire chief. So that's, that was decided at the meeting on the 24th. So I'm just kind of progressing through there. So we had a fairly lengthy discussion about the full-time, part-time, because there was a number of firefighters that felt there was some kind of combination that might be able to be done. And although the majority, I think, of the current firefighters were in favor of full-time fire chief. And they kind of stuck with the idea that Carlisle really needs a full-time fire chief. And so after their meeting on the 20th, we met on the 24th as a committee and discussed and support, and we'd like to bring forward tonight for your consideration that we be pursuing a full-time fire chief. So that's one. The second thing is we discussed and support requiring chief candidates that would progress to the finalist spot, or that we would take a look at people that have a bachelor's degree minimum. Master's degree would be preferred, but bachelor's minimum. We spent some time talking with them about that and amongst ourselves, so we'd ask for your support on that. And we discussed and support requesting, or I guess maybe giving you a heads up that we probably believe that this full-time fire chief, the salary requirements are going to be somewhere in the 120 to 140 range, and we ask you to consider that number. And we discussed and support, the committee supports asking you to consider keeping this fire chief's position a strong chief. That was a recommendation from MRI. They felt that we would get more qualified candidates if folks are familiar with working in the Commonwealth and serving as a fire chief or an executive in a fire department, that they'll understand that it's more desirable to have a strong fire chief's position as opposed to a weak fire chief's position. So I guess those are the four things that we discussed and asked for your consideration. And I guess the three things that we need an answer from you folks about to help us move forward with MRI and help with the process is if you'd if we could ask you to consider giving us this information tonight, full or part-time, strong or weak, and at least consider that our salary range is in the right ballpark, so that when we work with the posting with MRI, it's much stronger to post a position with a salary range than it is to use the caveat, excellent salary and benefit package. While that's common language, we feel and they feel we'll get a better candidate if we can supply a salary range. What'd I forget?
Summary.
Okay. Any questions for these gentlemen?
I was at the meeting, so.
Oh, you were at the meeting.
Tim and Alan were at the meeting.
Did either of you gentlemen? Okay, because I
Just-
have one question. But
So the department itself supported a strong chief
Yes.
as well?
That one, I would say, was probably unanimous of the people that were in the room, which was around 18 or 20 firefighters.
Was it? Okay.
I guess my question around that is, if there were any grievances, how do you expect to have them handled then when you have you have no place to go?
Well, you
Well-
can have contract language, which gives you relief for that sort of thing. You can specify the conditions under which options for relieving the person of duty, and it can be done. And, there are timelines that are standard in those kinds of contracts, where with cause, without cause, that sort of thing. And so our thinking was that would be the preferred way of handling that issue rather than the weak chief option.
Okay.
Well, correct me, don't we have a strong part-time chief right now, right?
Yes,
Without a
Right.
yes,
Without a contract, right.
yeah.
With a contract, you
With
can
a
put those,
contract,
you
you
can
put
put
it
those
in.
stipulations in there.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I'm concerned about. That's
Yeah.
why I was the one that was mostly, I don't know if, maybe not mostly, but I was concerned about strong
Yeah,
chief
the
versus weak chief,
language-
because
The
it's
strong
really,
chief statute allows you to discipline, discharge a strong chief only for just cause. So without an employment agreement that sort of speaks to everything that's not just cause, but, is a management issue, you don't have really much leverage. So I guess the feeling is that a strong chief is warranted, but an employment agreement with the board that spells out clearly the expectations that the board has of the chief is in the town's best interest.
yeah,
Yeah.
because
That's-
because
yeah.
we're both,
Would give
we've
you
had
that
that at this
leverage.
point, which
Right.
is
Yeah.
frustrating for
Yeah,
us,
similar
which is
to-
why the
You've got a
impetus for us to
contract,
want a weak chief,
Right.
so we could
Yeah.
have a,
You've got a management employment agreement with the chief and with myself, so it would be similar that, you have leverage over, if either of us goes rogue, you've got, options.
So the range, the salary range that was recommended is for a strong, full-time chief, right? Is there any differential in full or weak time, or weak chief? No, no. All right. I mean, all of these things make it easier, I think, for EMT, MRI, right? To get their job done in this kind of a time frame. This thing of going to full-time, it's not 100% agreement from within, right? As to the benefit. Is that correct?
Probably about
Correct statement?
Majority,
not 100%.
Majority.
Three or four individuals.
Two-thirds and three-quarters were in support of a full-time. The others were not against a full-time, but they were questioning, is there a way to distribute the load among a larger number of people?
Yeah.
And the funding.
Right.
And the funding, right. Well, yeah,
One
obviously.
of the suggestions made was with a part-time chief, but then have paid officers who took on more responsibility. So it wouldn't necessarily be less expensive, it would just be more disseminated.
And could a part-time chief be hired with a contract that says within 5 years, given these sets of goals that could be reached, that you'd be go to a full-time?
The issue that was raised both at the fire department meeting and with MRI is trying to attract
Yeah,
someone from
yeah.
outside as a part-time job.
Yeah.
And then also the other requirements of living within a reasonable response time and expectation that they're gonna be able to fill in voids, in case there's low shortage, whatever, would make it very tough to find someone from the outside. So that immediately removes a lot of possibilities from the position.
One of the things that they brought up through different courses and we worked through during our brainstorming exercise was we really want the full-time chief to be able to serve at least 5 years, 8's desirable, in a full-time capacity, so that it doesn't bring in someone who just wants to spike a retirement or have a hobby job. That this is we're trying to work with a professional, both they, the committee, everybody feels pretty strongly to work with a professional that has that kind of focus and will have that kind of dedication to be here for the time period we'd like them to be here. I'm talking about somebody who's full-time. It'd be a real unique individual that would take this part-time with the hopes of maybe someday going full-time. Because, to Bert's point, the response time thing would really come into question.
And the complication comes up is if you do go part-time, that person has to have another job.
Yeah.
And if that really limits your selection.
or they have to be independently wealthy.
Or independently wealthy, yes, that's, we all understand that.
As you know, a lot of us in public service already are.
What about the notion that this might take till February or March? What,
That's out of our control at this point in some respect.
I know, but what do we do if, in case that happens?
So there's a different, I'll just speak one voice on this, but someone who's inside there. If we're able to hire someone and contract negotiations, or we get more candidates than expected, or what, the biggest problem would be if we don't get appropriate candidates, because then we're right back to starting the process again and the clock runs out. But if it's the case where we have a candidate, but contract negotiations with the holidays drag us towards the end of the year and they have to give a month's notice, and we're late January, we're covered for that. The deputy can sign warrants, can process payroll. There's a bunch of things that can be done, plus kind of the continued operation of the board can declare an emergency, all the things that have to happen. If it's running, I don't know if it's running 3 months or more, then you really, and then maybe it's at 2, but you really have to look at appointing an interim chief. So if it's, on the order of a small number of weeks, it doesn't make sense to appoint an interim chief for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, or whatever. But when you start talking about months, and the way we would get there would be that we had no candidate that we wanted that also accepted the position, and that we were able to negotiate a contract.
They find that really hard to believe. I mean, MRI found that, when we looked at extremes, they found that hard to believe. And I think we're going to be fine if we use a management company like we are, we advertise appropriately, which they went through with us a few of the avenues, pay appropriately, and keep the process moving. I really don't think this is how this could get goofed up. They offered that if we had nothing, that they would put someone in for us, that they would help us do that. They have a couple, an interim, they have some now.
How would that be received by the department?
Well, you heard from David Newman, who was here a few weeks ago, said, let's leave that purely as a, plan B. That it should never be the plan A, because it would be disruptive. And very often these candidates, which are usually retired chiefs or retired deputies from other departments, are good at their job and they're good people and they're not disruptive from that point of view. They're not going to, reappoint that's not their job. So it would work, but it would be a disappointment because now they're going to have to go through and start the whole process again and don't know the direction. There's a lot of ideas, issues, and so on that are kind of on hold, saying it's not appropriate for the existing chief to do this on his way out, but for the new chief to be taking these on. Other departments, and there's been several in this area that have had interim chiefs for 3 months to a year, depending on what happened in the process. But as Chief Fisher said, our hopes are that given what we have on the criteria and so on, that we will be able to attract and sign a candidate. And timing may just be a little bit off, but not that. But we'll know pretty quick. So the answer is we're not going to get to December 31st and say, oops, you need to find an interim. You will know by early November if we have a good pool of candidates.
But in the event an interim would an internal interim be a possibility in that case?
It would be a possibility. Depends on the length of it, but yeah.
So this, okay. And what's the budget impact, worst case, at 140?
140, you're going to have to, 140 minus 52, and the benefits. It's a significant bump.
110 or so.
With benefits, you're probably at more than $100,000 impact.
Further discussion? So is there anybody that's against supporting the first of all, the full-time position on this board? No, okay, so we're in support of the full-time position. What about the salary range, 120 to 140K range? You're not in that position, or you don't want to do it? Right?
No,
What's
I'm
this?
not in opposition.
Okay,
No,
good.
I'm fine with it.
I just
Fine
wanted
with
to
it,
clarify what this was.
Yeah. That's what I do.
No, this is what you're saying.
Looking at the reasonable response time requirement, that
Yes.
sort of thing.
Yeah.
There aren't a lot of communities around Carlisle, including Carlisle, especially Carlisle, where somebody can afford to come
Yeah.
for less than that.
Right, right. Okay.
Well, it's just a big nut to swallow, but yeah.
Well, it is, but, you know, we knew we were going to have to do something.
Mm-hmm,
Um, And so I don't think it's coming as much of a surprise. All right, so we are in support of your using the salary range of 120 to 140K. Strong versus weak? Strong?
Strong.
strong.
Yeah, I mean, if we can address our
As
concerns
long as
in a
it's
contract.
our concerns are
Yeah,
addressed in a contract,
Yep.
Yep.
I think we're all in agreement with that. Anything else that you need from us on those? Were those your, I think that was all the
So
questions?
the next major update is, from that point of view, this is gonna go quiet for a little bit as the job gets posted. The next update we'll probably have will be on the number and general attributes of the candidates that we get, because this will post, there'll be a 30-day period to respond, sometime to review that. And then it goes very quiet because the candidates are not public at that point until they're, you know, in that final round. So although we'll do updates, there should not be much discussion at this point other than telling you how many qualified candidates there are, and then as we get closer to making a choice, then obviously fully re-engaging selectmen on that.
Well, keep us posted. And we have a liaison, and I remember two
Nathan.
liaisons.
Nathan too, yeah.
That
If
will
he comes
be
back.
reporting to us if anything does bubble up to the surface.
He's in
In
California.
California
California now,
business,
yeah.
apparently.
Yeah.
Okay,
We have
Thank you.
additional new revenues coming in next year of $300,000, $309,000 based on new construction that'll be taxed.
Ah,
And we have
About a third of it now.
2% baked into our payroll, which is $24 million, and 2% of that is $480,000. And we're just adding another $1,000 to that, $100,000.
yeah, which is why I wasn't too pleased about a $200,000 feasibility thing for
Yeah, this,
a field house.
the
Thank
good
you
news,
very
bad
much.
news was having David Flannery as, you know, lifetime resident here, having the school, which also paid for his benefits, able to switch back and forth and so on. We were fortunate.
Yeah,
Yes, we
At
were.
some point, that was going to end.
yeah.
And we now know what that point is.
Yes,
Yeah.
very specifically.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much for your
Thank you, guys.
good work.
Thank you very much. We're gonna get $100,000. Teaching positions we can
Yeah,
eliminate.
yeah, okay. There's a lot of fluff in that budget. There's a lot of fluff in the fire department budget. I think we have to
Well,
squeeze.
Okay, well. All right.
I will say that search committee is one of the most intelligent working groups I've ever been on.
Wow.
They're really doing a fantastic
No,
job.
and it was clear by how concise and focused.
Yeah.
And then the
tonight's
session
conversation
with the
was.
firefighters that Chief Fisher ran was just first rate.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He did a magnificent job.
Did he?
On something that could have been a really messy thing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. No,
Okay.
Chief's great, yeah.
Right. We have to close the October 2nd special town meeting warrant.
Okay, for the draft warrant, you have the two articles, the verbatim articles that the town of Concord is considering for the two projects, and we do have a possibility of a third article to fund the design for the Complete Streets program. We'll be submitting an application for the construction grant within the next few weeks. And the turnaround time is by late November, December. We should hear back from the state whether or not we got, you know, the $400,000 in construction funding. They don't pay for design costs, so this article would fund the design portion of the $400,000 grant, so that the process could continue and we'd have projects that could go out to bid next spring. I see Kerry, our finance director, is still here. We've talked about this, that possibly one way of funding this would be to transfer from the DPW budget on a temporary basis and backfill with free cash or some other resource at the annual town meeting in the spring if we had to make available, and the estimate is $85,000 based upon the engineering company's estimate of what the design cost of the projects would be. So that seems to be, we talked a little bit about reserve fund, other resources. Frankly, it's not a good fit for the reserve fund, I don't think. It's not really an emergency or an unanticipated expense, which is the test that the finance committee uses before they can make such a transfer. So our thought is, be it, Chapter 90 highway funds or just direct transfer from the DPW budget, that would be the way to make that money. If we find out in December we didn't get the grant, then nothing happens. So we're just, this is a contingency in case we get the grant. We need the money to design the improvements that would be funded through the grant, and go out to bid and construct them in the next construction season. So that's why I did add that draft third article there to preserve that opportunity. I saw Melinda Gambino was here earlier. I wondered if she was here to talk to that article, but that those are the three articles we identified. At one point in time, there was a discussion of strong chief, weak chief. I think you've kind of put that one to bed.
Yeah, I think we did. Yeah.
And judging from the tenor of the members of the fire department, it would have been an unpleasant conversation at town meeting, I think, to try to rescind that when the employment agreement really gives you the leverage over the employee that you need.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, I think we had adequate discussion about, the pros and cons of that, and it was good to lay that finally to rest.
Yeah, it's always been kind of an anomaly that, you've got a part-time chief of a call department who's a strong chief, yet you've got a weak police chief of a full-time department.
Yeah.
It never really quite added up, but, and Chief Fisher's never had a problem with being a so-called weak chief. The board supports his hiring decisions and the budgetary requests, so it's never, been an impediment to running the department for Chief Fisher.
Okay.
So those are the proposed three articles for the town meeting.
Did we reach out to, planning board or anyplace else to find out if anybody wanted to?
We did. We asked everyone.
It was short notice, so I'm not expecting.
To bring forth anything that couldn't wait until the spring. That was kind of the, what we asked people. You don't just throw pie in the sky stuff at us.
Yeah,
If
right.
there's anything that needs to be acted upon before the spring, bring
Right.
it forward.
Okay.
We didn't get anything on that nature, so.
So,
And the moderator has seen the draft warrant, and he is available on the 2nd, and we've reserved the auditorium, and everything is lining up nicely.
so I need a motion to close this baby.
I will move that pursuant to MGL Chapter 39, S10, the Board of Selectmen call for a special town meeting to be held on Tuesday, October 2nd, 2018, at 7 p.m. in the Corey Auditorium at the Carlisle Public School, and that the warrant for said special town meeting be hereby closed, and that it shall include the warrant articles as presented this evening by the town administrator, subject to final revisions as to form by town council.
Is there a second to that?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? That was unanimous. And we get to make our recommendations about those warrant articles later.
Yeah.
Right. And the Finance Committee will be coming to your next meeting on September 11th, and that'll be one of the items that's discussed with the Finance Committee.
Yeah. Okay, we're up to minutes. Well, no, sorry,
No.
8:45, liaison reports.
reports.
Liaison. Anybody have liaison report? Well, I was at the Municipal Facilities Committee last night, and we had a spirited conversation. We're inviting Tim to our next meeting because we have a lot of questions about where certain projects are. For instance, there was money appropriated or approved at town meeting for some sort of design study for the library and school, so we want to reinvigorate that study and get that off the ground. We also were concerned about, where we were at with hiring facilities manager, and I spoke to Tim, who said we're nowheresville with it. So that
We did have a very good response to the advertising, so
Yeah.
we talked about maybe placing some additional ads and other.
Yeah.
I think Craig's.
You
did or did
Craigslist
not?
Did not.
Oh,
did not.
Oh.
So Steve Hinton suggested that maybe we advertise in Craigslist.
Mm.
So I don't know if we're gonna try that or not, but
Anyone's got any suggestions?
unless anybody has any better suggestions, yeah.
Have you called Bill?
Yeah.
Twisting Bill's arm.
Yeah, no, I think, unless he wants the job.
Well, that's what I'm hoping, yeah.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
he knows we're looking, so,
Yeah.
anyway. So that was, and, we're talking about, we're going to recirculate the list that they had done last year, because they had a whole list of things, and they had prioritized the ones to do for this year, and never,
This year's gone.
just, and then the rest of it kind of fell off the
Right,
end,
that's what
so
happens,
we will
yeah.
be starting to look at all those items and deciding, what will be for next year, and the year after that.
Mm.
I think that was a major thing.
Dear Committee,
Ah.
this afternoon, we interviewed the final 6 of the 18 applicants
Oh,
to bow hunt this season on town property on 5 parcels, each of which has been mapped out with appropriate setbacks from trails and houses and things like that, so people will know exactly where their assignment will be, which parcel will be. They've all passed police background checks. They've been quarried. They've taken the safety proficiency test for the state. They've actually shown us that they can hit a target in 30 yards away from a tree stand at the Rod and Gun Club. And they're a really terrific bunch of folks. And I think anybody that's concerned, the concern has always been, I'm walking my dog, he's not on a leash, he's within earshot, but I don't want my dog to get shot by a bow hunter. And these guys have, and they're all incidental, they all happen to be guys, but they're all very much aware of safety is sort of foremost, and they're very experienced hunters. And I think from a town's perspective, part of the good news is that in each of these 5 parcels, there are a lot of illegal deer stands.
Yeah.
People have been hunting our land
Ah,
for
really?
a while. So we now have a group of 18 people that are volunteering to go out there
Yeah.
and identify any errant deer stands that are out there and get rid of them, report those to the police. So I think the net of this pilot program is going to be very positive.
Yeah, it's interesting because when we had hunters on our land in Michigan, we had 120 acres of deer. We had a deer preserve practically, and we had the same thing. We had dogs, and we didn't want gun hunters for that reason. But it turns out most of the bow hunters, are there before sunup, and they're gone by the time anybody else is up and walking around by and large.
And most of them usually are able to identify the difference between a deer and a dog.
Yes. Yes.
They know they both start with the same letter, but.
Yeah.
Well, they have dogs in their family, and they all have orange collars for their dogs if they're out during hunting season.
Yeah.
And just an aside, but anyway,
Oh, that's great.
There you
I think we'll have a very good
Good.
group of folks out there helping us with this problem.
And the
of
venison share for the
overpopulation.
Board of Selectmen?
Well, it'd be nice. I haven't had
Yes.
venison for a while. I still have some moose meat in my freezer.
Wow.
Jeez.
It's hard to get rid of.
Well, if you need any groundhog, I can help you.
Okay.
Council on Aging met today, and they just basically gave their financial reports and their outreach reports and their social workers report. So it's business as usual.
And I gotta say, as a user of the services, kudos to the COA. Oh, my God. I-
Yeah, they really are
They
fantastic.
have saved my life.
Yeah.
So,
I did have some questions on their financial report, some things that don't add up, but.
oh, really?
Well, they actually, with the grants and the Friends grant and the Regional Transportation Authority, the Lowell Regional
Right.
their budget is like $209,000. They deliver over $300,000 worth
Right.
of services because of
Yep.
all these other
I
grants.
understand.
So they really have multiplied their.
Yeah, no, they do a great job.
Yeah, that's right.
Any other reports? Okay. Now we're at the approval of minutes. Approval of the minutes of Tuesday, August 14th. Under the Ferns, first page of the Ferns Country Store, if you could just put a note that the chair opened the public hearing.
Public hearing, yeah.
And, well,
Oh, yeah,
open a
'cause, yeah, you just
public
got closed,
hearing,
yeah.
and that we received the documents.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure that they should, do those documents have to be included in the record? That we rec-
application?
The
The application?
Yeah, that should be part of the,
Because it's not yet,
okay, we can. we
Right,
can
so-
append that to the-
so I would just say, it was opened, we received the documents. This can't, discussion, then we closed it. Okay, otherwise, is there a motion?
Well,
Motion.
Any
Yeah,
any
well-
other emanations?
I motion to move to approve the minutes as revised.
second?
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Everything.
Oh,
The whole thing.
oh. Well, we did put something on the warrant for the.
Complete Streets.
Complete
Yeah, for the
Streets.
complete
Is
Design
that-
funding.
For design funding.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
Okay,
So, what is it on there?
85K?
What number? It's Article 3. There are only 3
Oh,
articles.
what number of, which number
No.
was the
Two
article?
of the high school articles and the third one.
The third one is Complete Streets.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. I'd entertain a
Simple enough.
motion. Sorry?
No, simple enough.
Yeah.
Sorry to have you come
Sorry.
on.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I was kind of preoccupied, so I'm glad that it worked out.
Okay.
I move we adjourn.
I second.
All right.
Aye.
Aye.
Oh, sorry, I thought.
No, hey, yeah, no.
Yeah.